All right, welcome to lesson 6, which is about collaboration and delegation.
Wait, hang on. I'm gonna be better if you wear this.
Okay.
Yeah, good.
All right, welcome to lesson 6, which is about collaboration and delegation.
No, okay, I'm just not feeling it. I guess sometimes you gotta do things yourself, but not all the times. So in this lesson, as Tony honestly quite eloquently said, we're talking about collaboration and delegation, because as a creator, at some point in your career, you're gonna get to the point where you're, successful. You're putting things out on a regular basis. You got more opportunities coming in than you know how to handle. And you're gonna have to learn how to delegate if you wanna get to the next level and you want to be able to keep putting things out at your same level or do more and also take on opportunities. So what we're gonna do in this lesson is talk about some of the lessons I've learned about delegation and collaboration, because it has been, let me tell you, a difficult process of learning over, the last probably, 5 years, right, Tony? It's like 2 years with you, probably 5 years telling myself I need to delegate. And what I want to start out with here is something that's more philosophical than tactical. And it's a piece of advice that a friend gave me a few years ago. We were walking around at VidCon with my friend Charlie, and he said, when it comes to delegation, you have to ask yourself, what is your art and what is just your ego? And the context here was I was insistent on continuing to edit my videos entirely, write my own videos, host them, do basically everything. And I was having trouble managing that with my content schedule, but also taking on additional opportunities, like filming a Skillshare class or like speaking somewhere. And he asked me, what is your art? Because for us at our channel, like my ability to edit a video isn't my art. My art is in the research process. It is in the speaking process. Other people can edit just as well as I can, if not better. So that is something I should delegate. And I had to really ask myself, I had to dig down and say, what is my art? And I think it's very similar. It's being able to sit in this chair and talk to the camera about the things I'm passionate about. It's doing the crazy research to go and build a gigantic Notion formula that most people wouldn't build in their spare time. It's not always in the edit. Sometimes it is. Sometimes I get artistic fulfillment through the edit, but not always. And because we're building things on a regular basis, then I need to learn how to delegate that. And I've practiced this, I've been working on it, I've gotten a lot of advice from people over the years. So what I want to do here is share some of that advice, both the tactical and the practical. So in terms of hiring people, what I have found is that people who are passionate, people who are willing to independently learn things on their own are almost always going to be better to work with than people who maybe are technically proficient, but they don't care about your mission. This is something that at least I've found out. So when I am hiring, when I'm evaluating candidates, I'm looking for that. There's a few other things here when it comes to looking for candidates, and this could probably be a class all on its own, but I have found that when I'll put out a Google form where people can apply for a position that I have out there, I will put, and I have to make this a PG term, but they're crap test questions. It's kind of like how I think this was Van Halen. I could have been wrong. Always wanted only brown M&Ms in his trailer. And everyone thought this was like the most diva thing, but what he was really looking for was detail-oriented nature in the people who are going to be rigging up pyrotechnics and lights and very expensive and sometimes dangerous sound equipment. Somebody who would be detail-oriented enough to go through the process of picking out all the brown M&Ms was likely to be detail-oriented with the stuff that actually matters. So I will put questions kind of like that on the application process that I build, such as what is the 6th listed DDR song that Thomas intends to get a perfect score on his impossible list. Nobody knows that off the top of their head, but the question gives context clues as to how to solve it, because they're not in a test room where they can't use their phone. They can use the internet all they want, so it'd be very easy to Google Thomas Frank impossible list, Control F for DDR, and then count the songs. But I cannot tell you, actually no, I can tell you how many people either didn't answer the question or said, I don't know in the application. And what that told me is I'm not willing to go independently solve a problem on my own. So when I'm hiring, I'm looking for people who have that independent problem-solving spirit. In the case of Tony, my editor, who I was a little bit mean to for a joke in the beginning of this lesson, he has that spark. He has his own YouTube channel where he's constantly pushing the envelope, and that's why I love working with him. He also is always excited when I come up with a new idea for my own channel. Instead of being like, well, I just do what I do, he's like, yeah, let's go ahead and do that. I want to learn something new. That's what I'm looking for. So seek out people who are independent problem solvers and who are excited to work with you, who want to help you succeed, who want to be part of the mission. In terms of tactical day-to-day delegation, let's get a little bit into that. Again, this could be an entire class here, but we've learned a few things about how to delegate. I talked about my feedback process in the last video about templatization, so I'm not going to go over that again, but I am going to go over how we sort of assign tasks to people and make sure that they can see what they need to do. So again, here in Notion, we have team workspaces for each person. This one is mine, so it will show projects in progress that are associated with me. And because I kind of run the entire business, my filter criteria here is pretty much anything where I'm the editor or the writer on an article, or if it's not an article, almost everything, because I want to see everything that's going on. But I'm kind of the manager. My friend Martin, who works with me as well, he's also very much in a managerial role. For someone like Tony, though, and we can go to Tony's workspace right here, he is not the manager, he's just the editor. So he doesn't need to see as much stuff. He only sees things that he is assigned to. These are all pieces of content where he has been assigned. So he can come in here and he can say, okay, well, here's the tasks I'm assigned to. Here's the projects that I'm assigned to. What are the due dates, the published dates? What are the statuses of each part of the process? And I can basically see what I have to do if I'm him, I suppose. So that really helps. And whenever we create an instance of a template, we can, again, just set him as the editor, set me as the writer. Or if it's a podcast, maybe I would actually set Anna as the editor because she's the one who edits our podcasts. So with everyone having a team page like this, everyone is sort of informed as to what they need to be doing. We also sometimes have team meetings. So sometimes we will either have everyone over in person if it's safe to do so and people have time, or we'll have remote meetings on Zoom and we'll just kind of get on the same page. So that's all I'm going to say about actually hiring people and delegating work here. This could be the subject of an entire class. Let me know in the discussion section of the class if that's something you'd want to see in the future. But what I want to do to wrap this lesson up is talk a little bit about collaboration with your peers, with fellow creators and artists. And this is kind of a philosophical part of the lesson, but what I find is that a lot of artists out there, a lot of creators out there naturally see other people doing the same thing that they're doing as competition. And the great thing about being a creator, especially on the internet where the audience grows day by day and the amount of niches and little areas that you can get yourself into, they also grow. This is something I talk about in the interview with my friend Charles, which will be in the lesson at some point here, is that there's constantly new opportunity. With the growing audience, there are always new people who are going to be hungry for what you are putting out into the world, for what you want to say. And the same is true for people who are also in your area creating similar things. And the wonderful thing about being a creator is when you collaborate with your peers, it's almost always a win-win-win scenario. People love to see collaborations between artists that they follow. And, knowing a lot of people in the productivity space like Ali Abdaal and Matt D'Avella and Joey Schweitzer from Better Ideas, I find that the people who watch Joey, the people who watch Nathaniel and Matt and Ali, they often watch me as well. They love seeing the collaborations there. So it's kind of a win-win-win again. And even if you're covering the same topics, it's almost always a good thing. There's no reason to see it as competition other than to maybe inspire yourself to sharpen your own sword, essentially. This actually happened to me last year when I started watching Matt D'Avella's content a bit more, and I got inspired to really up my own game. I felt like I was kind of resting on my laurels production-wise before that, and he kind of inspired me to get new camera gear, learn new editing techniques, learn new filming techniques, and I think my content has been a lot better for it. But that is where I try to let the comparisons end, because I don't want to see Matt or Lee or anybody else as competition. I want to see them as peers, people who I can work with, and together we can make our space better. So I'd encourage you to follow your peers, reach out to them, interact with them on social networks, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, and maybe propose collaborations. Find ways where you can interact and build something that neither of you could make on your own, and your audiences are going to love you for it. Well, look at that. You're at the end of the class. So congratulations. You've made it through basically all the material that I have to teach you today. Hopefully you found this class helpful. A couple of things that I want to touch on, just to sort of review. Number one, think about those metrics that matter to you most. Don't focus on the vanity metrics, focus on those KPIs, key performance indicators, the things that really get you to where you want to be as a creator. Secondly, think about delegation and think about what you can do to improve your own processes through templatification. I'm making up another word here, but both of these things, they end in ation and they're very, very useful to your process. Beyond that, this class is not over. We have at least 30 minutes of additional content coming over the next few weeks in the form of interviews with 3 of my favorite creators and friends. Jordan Herod, who is an AI researcher at Harvard and MIT, also a YouTuber. My friend Ali Abdal, who has quite a few classes here on Skillshare himself, makes a lot of productivity videos. And my friend Charles Cornell, who is a phenomenal jazz musician and YouTuber. So we've got interviews coming all about their creative processes and how they stay productive as well. Beyond that, one other thing we did in this class is a lot of Notion-specific tutorials and demonstrations. And if that is something that interests you, I've got a brand new channel over on YouTube called Thomas Frank Explains. You can go over to thomasjfrank.com/explains if you want to check out that channel. Again, right now it is completely focused on Notion. So if that's an app that you want to learn more how to use, from beginner stuff to very, very advanced stuff, I'm going to be doing tutorials over there. And last but not least, if you have questions, if you have thoughts, if you want to add your own experience, head down to that discussion section and I will be down there interacting with you for the foreseeable future. Thanks again for watching. Thanks again for coming to Skillshare and learning, and I'll see you in the next class. Speaking of productivity, I also have a couple of additional classes here on Skillshare. One of them is about building your productivity system. Again, the combination of your task manager, your calendar, your note-taking system, your file management system, which we showed a little bit in the previous video. So if you want to learn how to optimize all those things, make all those tools work harmoniously so that nothing ever slips through the cracks in your life, check that class out. And my second class is all about building strong habits. So if you want to learn how to take your goals, break them down into actionable, action steps that you can go through on a daily basis, and then stick to those and make them into long-term habits, check out that class. All right, well, thanks so much for coming back to check out this discussion with my friend Ali. Of course, as you probably know, he's in the UK, so I called him over Zoom to talk about some of the things that we discussed in this class. Well, hey, Ali.
Hey, thanks for having me on this. This is fun.
Welcome to my secret Skillshare podcast.
The secret podcast. Nice. That's very brandable.
It's the secret podcast. Yeah. Well, we're doing a class all about building a productive mindset for staying creative, essentially kind of like productivity for creatives and creators. And you're one of the most productive people that I know.
Yes.
And you also happen to be quite creative. So I wanted to have you and a few other people in this class to just sort of talk about your creative process. What I wanted to start with was kind of what's happened very recently in your life, which is that you are taking a sabbatical from medicine. So before this, your channel was a side project to a full-time job, which I've had in the past, but haven't had for a long time. So how has your process changed since making YouTube sort of your full-time gig, or I guess like going on sabbatical and having only that to worry about?
Yeah, honestly, I'm really surprised by how little the process has actually changed. I think this really helped me appreciate Parkinson's law in action. And I found that kind of when I was working a full-time job, sort of in the midst of coronavirus and getting home and then churning out videos, I was actually producing more videos per week than I am now, where I've just got this sort of like seemingly gallons of free time. And it just sort of goes to illustrate that principle that work expands to fill the time that you allocate to it. And so, for example, today, all I had to do was write a voiceover for an upcoming vlog. And I started doing it about half an hour ago and I still haven't finished it. And now we've got this call, but you know, in the morning I was doing a few more things like reading and taking notes from some books, which I enjoy. And it's sort of those other bits that kind of took a back seat when I was working full time. So now I found that my production on the YouTube front hasn't really changed. It's just that I now have more margin in my life to do other things that I value. Started playing PlayStation as well recently. Got a TV for the first time. So, you know, all of these normal things that I just didn't do at all when I was kind of juggling the work and YouTube thing at the same time.
Do you find yourself justifying things that you would have or maybe not justifying, but almost telling yourself that certain things you would have let go in the production process in the past, like, have to be there. Because one thing I've realized with the free time that comes with doing this full time is I'll get an idea and then I'll be like, oh, well, if I don't do that for this video, then like the video won't be right. Like you're doing, or you did, an investing video. I saw you post the thing on Instagram stories asking for questions, which I did, I think, a couple of months ago on Twitter.
Oh,
I asked for investing questions, and I'm like, okay, so all these like asking for questions on investing now, he probably won't have the video out for like 2 weeks, and then it's out like 3 days later. And for that video, I'm like, okay, I've been investing for 10 years, but if I don't go read A Random Walk Down Wall Street, that video is going to be a failure for me. So, and I know that when I was working full time or as a full time student, I would have just been like, just say what I know, just share what I know, just get it out. I don't have time for that. Like, are there things like that where you latch onto an idea and then can't let it go?
Yeah, this is one place where I kind of look up to you. Well, one amongst many, because I think your videos are always very beautifully crafted, like yours and Matt's and Nathaniel's. And I feel like I'm not putting in nearly as much effort into my videos as you guys put in yours. And it's an area that I want to improve in, but I think that was what I realized fairly early on while doing the YouTube Plus work thing, that the thing that makes kind of, for me, a video that performs well has almost zero correlation with the amount of effort that I've put into it. The things that I found were true were most often that it's just an interesting subject, or just I have no idea why this video is doing well. And so my strategy is always that, you know what, I'll really think about, will adding this thing really add to the video? And if it does and it's easy enough to do, we'll do it. And if not, we'll think, okay, scrap that. We'll think about it for a future video. But certainly my production values are a lot less pro than yours are. I think partly because I kind of don't bother with all the sort of the B-roll, the fancy production that you have on yours.
And the funny thing is, I bet you if we asked like an audience member who watches both of our channels, they might not say that. Yeah. I would bet like a lot of audience member would be like, oh, they're about the same.
Yeah. There was something that you said in one of your videos ages ago, which was, I think you were talking, or this might have been in a podcast. You were talking about how with your podcast, you used to film it from 3 angles or 2 angles. And then you realize that no one actually cares and you just film it from 1 angle now. And so I kind of have that in my mind as like, does anyone actually care if I kind of spend a whole day shooting B-roll for this? Probably not. Let's just get the video out and move on to something else.
It's something I have to keep telling myself. I'm like, humans, they connect with other humans, so humans want to see human faces. But like as the creator, I'm like, the less time my face is on screen, the better, because it means absolutely. I put effort in.
Yeah, and that thing
it's like
thing like, oh, I've had too much A-roll for a bit now. I need to have a B-roll shot. And
So you had mentioned things that you cut out of the video because you know they might not serve the audience well. I am terrible with this. You may have seen that video I did on like setting up your environment for like the work from home series.
Oh yeah.
That video was probably going to be twice as long because I had written an entire section on how to make your Wi-Fi as good as possible. Like I had a section about network sniffers to figure out what channel your Wi-Fi router was on. Okay. And then you could figure out what your neighbors had. And my fiance looks at the script and she's like, you need to cut that out. Nobody cares. So, like, do you have another person who looks over your scripts ever and tells you to cut things out?
Usually I'm the one cutting things out of the script, because actually for most of my videos now, it's not me that's writing the main script. It's my writer/researcher guy called Angus. And so I'll look through the script and think, okay, does this really need to be in there? And then when I get the edit back from my editor, so when he's editing, he'll do a round of, bro, I think this video is too long. We should cut out this middle chunk. And I'm like, sure, go for it. Do whatever you want. And then I'll do a final round of cutting where I'm like on Frame.io, figuring out, like, is there any bit where I've repeated myself? That's an area that I'm very bad at. That's an area that you're very good at, because I think you script your videos more heavily than I do. And so it's like everything feels very crisp whenever I watch one of your videos. Whereas with mine, I always like repeating myself, because that's what you do when you're teaching a class. You want to repeat the same point over and over again. So it's things like that through the writing, script checking, filming, editing process will get chopped out over time.
I guess getting back to people writing scripts for you, how do you delegate that? Like, what's your process? And you know that I get into Notion as much as you do, so like, feel free to get into the Notion stuff.
Oh, absolutely. Can I share my screen?
Yeah.
Let's have a look. Okay, so I have my videos database, which is sort of very heavily modeled off of your one that you've made a YouTube video about and kindly released the template for. The way we do it, and this is going to become the subject of a course I'm working on called the Infinite Content Engine, which sort of explains how all of this stuff works. But sort of the top level overview is we've got our kind of database of all of the ideas, which are usually either blank or tagged with idea in Notion. And so we've got 145 of these right now. And then we've got this writer column. And so, for example, I think the videos that I do about books are a decent model for this. So Think Like a Monk. We're doing one about Think Like a Monk, and status is ready to film. And so we sort of have title, thumbnail, and script is the one that Angus has written. And so he'll just sort of write the whole thing. And over time, initially it started off as just like a continuous prose, but now sort of he defines kind of voiceover, A-roll, B-roll, A-roll, and then we do this overhead sketchpad thingy. And so he actually tells me exactly what I have to do, which is quite nice. So it's like someone else is telling me what to do, and I will look through that, and that would then be my default thing. But if I want to change it, I'll just change it on the fly, and they'll figure it out in post.
So you have that there. Do you have any forms of like checklists that people have to go over, or does everyone just sort of know what they have to do?
Yeah, everyone kind of knows what they have to do. I did copy your checklist, your this one, uploading, publishing checklist. I'm not sure anyone ever used it, but generally it's the same process for everything. So I know we probably should use checklists because checklist manifesto, and it's like obviously a good thing to do. It's just that no one bothers with it so far.
I always just, when I'm uploading, I look at it.
Yeah.
It's mainly helpful for things where there's just a million little tasks, and uploading is one of those things. And every so often I'll forget one. So I just make sure I look through it.
Yeah.
Like accidentally capitalizing a letter in a sponsor URL. And so it doesn't work. So it's like, cool, check the sponsor URL every single time before a video goes live, just to make sure.
That's a
that
good
kind of
shout.
stuff.
That's a good shout.
But I've found that in the past we've gone overboard with checklists, and like with Asana, they have subtasks and subtasks. So, being the organizer, I'm like, well, every single action needs to have a checklist item, right? And over time, nobody uses the checklist, and everyone just finds that their assigned task list just gets gunked up with a bunch of stuff they're never checking off. So I think there's kind of a balance to strike there with using checklists for their intended purpose, but also realizing that like when you hire people, you have to trust them because like that's their job. And hopefully if they're good at their job, they would just know to do it.
Yeah.
Without needing explicit instruction every time. Yeah, well, I think we're right about at the hour mark. So, dude, thank you for jumping on and doing this with me.
Yeah, thank you. This has been a lot of fun. And I definitely want to interview for my upcoming one as well.
All right, let's do it. Check back next Friday for a conversation between myself and my friend Jordan Herod, who is a PhD candidate in neuroengineering and brain-machine interfaces and a YouTuber on the side. We'll be talking about how her productivity systems enable her to be creative in both her YouTube endeavors and in her PhD work. And as always, if you are opted in to Skillshare emails, you're going to get an email notification when it goes live. All right, thanks so much for coming back and checking out this conversation with my friend Jordan. If you don't know, Jordan is over in Boston and I'm here in Denver, so I called her over Zoom so we could discuss some of the things that we talked about in this class. Well, hi Jordan, welcome to my secret podcast here on Skillshare.
Thank you for having me.
I thought it would be fun to do some interviews and some, conversations that aren't just me in this class, because everyone's got different approaches to productivity. And I wanted to talk to you because you're a PhD student who is not only going to Harvard, but also MIT, which I take it it's like some kind of, is it a joint program?
Yeah, so my program has like a PhD program, an MD PhD program, and an MD program. And so the PhDs take med school courses at Harvard Med with everybody else. And then the MDs also get to do research and stuff. So we bounce back and forth.
That's awesome. And then you also run a YouTube channel on the side.
Yes.
So just no big deal.
Yeah, I People always ask me how I like find the time to do all the things, because that's like the first 2 things on the list of 10 things that I do every week. And the honest answer is that the time usually finds itself. But I have some strategies that help me stay on track, but I think a lot of it is just that I tend to work better when I have 8 billion things to do than when I have 2, for some reason.
Well, I was talking to Ali Abdal in the first little interview we did for this class, and he was kind of saying the same thing, where when he was a full-time doctor, he was getting more videos done than when he took a sabbatical, and now he just has all this free time.
Yeah, I could see that. Yeah.
It's
I don't
it's
know,
kind of
it's-
interesting to like. Oh, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say it's that time pressure. And I think, like, for me, it's also partially a bit of an ADHD thing where if I have like time pressure, I can hyperfocus, and hyperfocus lets me like get a bunch of things done at the same time. Whereas if I just like have no pressure to do anything, then I'll procrastinate everything on my to-do list until the time pressure starts kicking in.
Yeah, that's kind of how I work as well. So do you find that you're actually multitasking, or do you hyper-focus on one thing and just tend to get it done really quickly?
I would say I hyperfocus on one thing and tend to get it done really quickly. I also now try to rely less on hyperfocus. I got diagnosed like at the beginning of the year, right before COVID and everything started. And so it was useful in some ways because it helps me develop like specific strategies and use specific tools that work better than other things that I've tried, because I kind of know what challenges I'm dealing with. But at the same time, sometimes, you know, my brain doesn't want to work. And so I sit on the couch and I wait for that hyperfocus to kick in when it's 2 hours before the deadline and I know I need to get something done.
Can we actually talk about that? Like, I mean, if you're comfortable with it, but I know like my fiance also has the exact same thing where she will hyperfocus, but then it's not like it's on tap all the time. So what are some of the strategies that you use to, I guess, be able to use it more often or be able to work without it?
So there's 2 things that have tended to work for me, especially this year. One is external pressures. So one is, you know, telling my advisor that instead of meeting every 2 weeks, I'd rather meet weekly, because that external pressure, knowing that I have to meet with him sooner, will get me to actually stay on top of what I'm supposed to be doing, knowing that I have homework deadlines. You know, being in standards is actually great for stuff like this because I have to get videos out on a certain schedule because that's when I said that I would do it. And so there's a lot of external structures that I put in place to kind of make sure that I know all the things that I have to do. So I use Todoist to mostly keep track of all my stuff, and then make sure that I actually do it. And then the second thing that's really helped me this year, and this is something that's like obviously not applicable to the general population, is medication. Because it helps calm my brain on some level. I think I have inattentive ADHD, and I've often heard it described as, you know, the hyperactive stereotype for ADHD is the kid running around the classroom. And inattentive is the kid running around your brain. So on the outside, you seem, you know, like you're not paying attention, like you're fairly calm. But on the inside, it's just hard to get your brain to kind of sit down with one thing enough to do it. And medication has actually helped a lot with that, in terms of not having to have so many external structures in place to like really force me to do it, like being in my office, having other people around me, stuff like that. Where I can work from home and like actually get things done, which has been extremely helpful this year.
I think it's good to acknowledge that. And exact same thing with my fiance. So it's been interesting to learn from people who have actually had the experience of using it versus not using it. Because there seems to be a lot of stigma around it, especially from people who don't have the experience of, you know, dealing with ADHD. And especially with, you know, people like you, where you say outwardly you don't see the symptoms because it's that more inattentive style.
Yeah, no, it definitely, it's been super interesting to learn more and more about it and kind of see all the different ways it manifests, from work to like not having hobbies that aren't like also essentially work. Like YouTube was a hobby and now it's work. Science writing was a hobby and it's turned into work. And that's just kind of how my brain works most of the time. And so trying to find things that like I don't monetize. So like sci-fi books are like that for me, where it's like reading a book is not going to like get me sponsored or something. It's just something that I enjoy doing. And having those moments to decompress actually helps me a lot in terms of getting work done, because it gives me some time to kind of take the pressure valve off my brain a little bit and let it run wild.
So how do you balance your YouTube work with your PhD work in terms of the time structuring? Do you tend to put the YouTube stuff first, or is the other thing come first?
Oh, my PhD work definitely comes first for now.
And I don't mean in terms of prioritization. I mean in terms of like on any given day.
Like, which do I do first in the morning?
Mm-hmm.
PhD still.
Okay.
Unless there's something that comes up for YouTube where I have to do it in the morning, I usually don't do YouTube until the afternoon or the evening. I don't necessarily have a reason for that. I think that I tend to work best when my mind is relatively fresh. Mm-hmm. And weirdly enough, writing things like scripts, or at least doing the initial drafts of scripts, doesn't take that much brain power for me. Okay. I can kind of sit down with, usually actually not my laptop, usually I get my iPad with the Magic Keyboard and sit on the couch and like watch TV and just kind of type out outlines and then start filling them in. And I can do that from, 6 to 10 p.m. And it's not going to be a huge strain on my brain. So usually I get up pretty early. I get up at like 5:36, go to the gym, and then come back, start doing PhD stuff. If I have YouTube related meetings during the day, then I take those meetings. And around 4 or 5 is usually when I'll start switching over into YouTube world, and how much work I'm doing on what usually depends on what's coming up and what kind of videos I have to do. So, and then I do more on the weekends. Weekends are YouTube. Weekends are definitely YouTube. I try not to do any PhD work on the weekends.
Are there like dedicated break days at all, or is it like 7 days a week?
No.
No.
I mean, like federal holidays, I guess. Like I didn't do any work yesterday, which was Indigenous Peoples Day. But otherwise, well, no, I did do work yesterday. That's a lie. I would say, so weekends, I do less work. Like if I work for like 10, 11 hours a day on weekdays, I'm working for like 3 or 4 on the weekends. So I still have time to like hang out with friends or not hang out with friends in person because COVID, but do whatever I'm going to do that's like social and relaxing and whatnot. I still definitely try to make time for that.
And are you totally working at home now with COVID?
I am, I guess, 90% working from home. So I just got off of about 2 months of going into lab 2 or 3 days a week because I do animal work and I cannot do that from home. So right now I'm going to be going in maybe 4 or 5 hours a week, I think, to do some device stuff and set up for next round of experiments. But predominantly I'm working from home.
Do you find that being able to go in helps with the separation between YouTube and your PhD work, or are you able to sort of manage it?
One of the interesting things that I actually noticed in transitioning to working from home for PhD stuff was that I had a lot more trouble managing the balance between the two as soon as I did, because home was for YouTube before I started working from home. And yeah, it took me a little while to figure out how to manage that separation. So I think going into lab for me right now is less about separating PhD things from YouTube things and actually a lot more about just like having a change of pace, like getting outside of my apartment, being in a place that actually feels like I'm at work instead of being at home doing work. But yeah, it's nice to go in, but it's not a full separation from PhD stuff because like, don't tell my advisor this, but I would edit videos in lab. Like, especially if there was an animal experiment where all I had to do was like sit there and watch, like I'd be like writing scripts, editing videos, blah, blah, blah. Like, the line got blurred sometimes. But yeah, it's nice to get out of the apartment mostly.
It's something I think about with accountability. Like I've tried to have my really good friends or my fiance keep me accountable on things. And because I know these people so well, I know they're not going to give me that hard of a time. So it's almost like it's better to be held accountable to somebody you only know sort of well, because then there's like that unknown factor there. Like I don't know what my coach is going to say if I blow off my workout. He's in Missouri. I don't know.
Yeah, no, I definitely run into that problem. I guess it's easier a little bit for me to have people that I know hold me accountable, like, than it is to hold myself accountable, because I know that like there are no ramifications if I tell myself that like you have to get this thing done at X time and then I don't do it. So it definitely works better with like foreign black box entities where I'm like, oh no, if I send this like 2 hours late, they're going to be super mad at me. And then I get the email back and they like literally could not care less. But yeah, it helps to have something like that, which is interesting on the PhD side because like I'm not friends with my advisors, but like I know them decently well. And so even having, you know, weekly meetings doesn't necessarily mean that I don't procrastinate stuff because I know that I'm going to walk in the meeting and I know how they're going to react and they're going to be like, yeah, it's totally fine. Don't say that. Like there have to be consequences or something, except not actually.
Well, I think we're about out of time, but Jordan, thank you so much for doing this.
Yeah, this was a lot of fun.
Coming up next Friday, we've got a conversation with my friend Charles Cornell, who is a musician, phenomenal jazz piano player, and a YouTuber. We'll be talking about how he pivoted from super popular meme-based content on YouTube to teaching and doing more in-depth content that he really loves. Hey, thanks so much for coming back to check out this conversation between myself and my friend Charles Cornell. Charles lives right here in Denver where I live, so he actually came over to my studio and we'll have this conversation in person. Oh, hey, Charles.
Oh, hey, Tom.
Welcome to my secret Skillshare podcast.
Oh, thanks so much for having me. This is super fun.
Yeah, and we're recording on some very new school tech.
This is going to sound probably not great, but you know, we're at least getting somewhere.
I believe the Beatles actually recorded onto one of these.
Okay, well then in that case, I take that back entirely.
So, to start this off, we should probably introduce people to who you are and what you do, just in case they haven't
Sure. So I make music in a lot of different ways. I got my start making like memes where I took just videos of people talking and figured out what all the notes were, like the actual pitches of speech. Because like when we talk, everything that comes out of your mouth is a note. So I would just take that and turn it into notes and then put chords with all those notes and make videos that way. And people seemed to like them, I guess. So, and then over time, you know, I was very fortunate that it was kind of a natural transition to just go, people would be like, how do you do this? And so I said, let me tell you how I do it. And so that's kind of transitioned into operating more of like an educational channel at this point, which is great because I love being able to sort of like pass on what I know to as many people that maybe are interested in learning more about music or just, you know, getting better at their instruments or whatever it is. You know, that having that opportunity is really incredible. And the fact that I can continue to sustain a channel doing that is just awesome. So, you know, because it can be kind of difficult maybe to go from memes to like substantial content because if people are like following you for memes, they're kind of like, I want memes, stop talking, you know. So yeah. But.
And it's been cool to see like you've been able to successfully transition, and now you've got hour-long video, or maybe not an hour long, but like half an hour long video on like here's the music theory behind this song, or here's how to practice efficiently.
Yeah, no, and it's kind of, like I said, it was just sort of a natural transition because my background in my education, which is, of course, you know, I went to music school, I studied jazz, piano, and everything. So it's everything that I've learned about music theory and applied theory and improvisation and all those things that were how I originally made the videos. So it was just sort of natural to kind of explain that to people who were interested in like, how does this work, you know? So it's been a very natural transition.
One of the things that we talk about in this class is the different metrics that you can follow, which like you stare at the same metric dashboard that I do all day long.
For better or for worse.
Right. And one of the points was like, you know, eventually a metric that may have been helpful becomes unhelpful. It's like that whole Goodhart's Law thing where you focus on it so much that it's no longer like a measure of the health of your business. It's just the one thing you're optimizing for. I think you're a really good case of this because the memes brought in more views than what you're currently doing, but they're not really getting you to where you wanted to be.
No. So in the same way that there is a difference between the value of a single audience member on TikTok versus Instagram versus YouTube, every platform has a different value point for what what an audience member is worth. Now, obviously not actually on an individual level. Like, it's amazing that anybody follows anything that we do. That's incredible. But in terms of an audience's sort of predisposed tendency to take action on something that you maybe ask them to do.
Right.
Traditionally, YouTube is where we've seen is the most impact.
Yeah.
So it's like when you do a call to action on YouTube, that's gonna have way more of an impact than if I did a call to action on my TikTok,
Yep.
where I have almost just as many followers on TikTok as I do on YouTube. So it's incredible how that changes. So especially in the same way, content can do the same thing. So for me, doing the memes, like you said, they got on average more views than my videos do now. But those views were worth a lot less because they weren't views that were people cared maybe about the joke and maybe
Yeah.
they would share it a lot, which was incredible. But they weren't there for me. They didn't care
Right.
what I had to say. And so the transition has really been developing an audience that is interested in what I have to say, because maybe they understand that there's something of value that I can contribute to them, which of course is my goal. So it's like, even though it might on the surface look like a smaller portion of my audience that watches every single video, that portion of the audience is far more dedicated and far more, valuable in the sense that they're engaged.
They're showing up to listen and they're interested in what you're interested to talk about.
Exactly.
So there's like less of a mismatch there in terms of intentions.
You're,
Because
yeah.
I guess like your ultimate goal is not to be a comedian.
Yeah, no, and because I don't feel like I'm naturally that funny, so it's like not something that I would ever pursue. But I do feel like I can teach people about music,
Right.
And I do feel like I can do that in a way that makes it feel much more accessible than maybe music classes or even some courses in college.
What are the metrics that you're now focusing on?
That's a good question, because I think maybe something, of course, that's unique to YouTubers and content creation in general. Like the view count is that's always going to be something that we look at,
Yeah.
right? It's not something where, you can say, well, the views don't matter because it's this. There's certain points where you can kind of say maybe conversions on a call to action are more important, which is true, but
Right.
but that's not going to happen unless you have at least a baseline of viewership. So I
Yeah.
am always concerned about viewership, and that's something that I am always paying attention to. It's just that when you start focusing on other metrics, depending on how you structure your business, other metrics that are perhaps more valuable than just the view count, you become less worried about the one individual thing.
Yeah.
And especially when you develop the understanding that I've had more success on a single video with less than 1/10 of the viewership than a viral video, because a viral video starts to reach a point where you're just not like, they're viral views. Viral views inherently are less valuable because they're just reaching an audience that sees it. They're like, oh my God, that's so cool. And maybe they share it and maybe they, watch it a bunch of times, and that's great, but they don't know you. They don't care about you. They're certainly not going to take action on anything that you're asking your audience to do.
Right.
So a much, much smaller subset of that audience, which of course looks like way fewer views on paper, and it is, but those views are far more valuable because they're reaching a better, more dedicated audience.
It's kind of like that 1,000 true fans idea.
Yes.
Like if you had 1,000 true fans, you could build a sustainable
You can make a
full-time
living.
business
Yeah,
for yourself.
absolutely.
And I guess there's like different layers that kind of echo out from that core. So maybe you have 1,000 true fans. You've got 10,000 people who don't know you super well yet, but they're very in tune with what you care about. And then maybe there's like 100,000 people who are like, I like music. 1 million people who are like, well, you did Cardi B, so I'm into
Yes.
that. So it's like there's always going to be a smaller contingent of people who are very in tune with what you care about.
And it's interesting because initially that is kind of concerning, because before you're in that world, before I was in the world of YouTube and understood, how everything worked and the balance of how to provide value to the right group of your audience, I would have looked at, say, 1 million people that watched a video and the suggestion that you'd be lucky if 1,000 of them were primed to take action on anything. That would have been terrifying, right? Because you're like, I can reach that many people and have that little of an impact.
It's only 1%.
Right.
Yeah.
But then you learn about how this stuff actually works, and you're like, oh, if you get 1% of people to do anything, you're like a hero.
Yeah, like you're doing pretty well.
It's insane, right? So it's just about understanding the value points, and then also, you know, looking at success stories and going, oh, wait, they're making that happen on such a tiny subset of an overall reach, and that's something that's been interesting to learn that dynamic and try to figure out, you know, exactly, okay, well, how do I gauge how well I'm doing? You know, and what are the combinations of metrics that I need to look at? Is it views? Is it maybe, I don't know, something exterior altogether, like merch sales or you know, or course sales or something like that?
Yeah.
Which ultimately, obviously, like, you know, if the bottom line is it's, I guess it depends on your definition of how are you gauging your success. Like,
Right.
Are you gauging it on reach? Are you gauging it on revenue for your business? You know, because like those are all obviously different things, and they don't equal each other, right? More views does not equal more revenue for your business.
Yeah,
You
not
know,
necessarily.
So, not necessarily.
Well, I'm curious to know, like, what are you optimizing for right now? When you really get down to it, and
Yeah.
like go beyond just I want to make more money. Like, what
Yes.
what is the core idea that you're optimizing for?
Well, I think a lot of those points help each other out, right? So and what I mean by that is that if I'm creating content that's overall just perceived as more valuable, maybe it does result in more revenue, which, okay, that's great. That's fine, of course, you know, but so it's you know, if I look at one thing, I guess in my mind, I'm kind of thinking of it as if I can improve here, that's going to have a ripple effect throughout all the other metrics that I might gauge on. Aside from, of course, like we're saying, the viral views, which I certainly, in the beginning, I was optimizing way more for viral views, you know, and I mean, I don't think I've hit 1 million views on a video in the last 2 or 3 months,
Yeah.
which would have made me nervous before. But now I'm looking less at like view count as the actual metric of, you know, how well am I doing? And I'm looking much more at consistency, because in the beginning,
Right.
I'd be all over the place. I'd have 100,000, I'd have 50,000, and then I'd have 3 million, and then I'd have 900,000, then 30,000. It was all over the place. As great as the explosions were, when I'd post something that I was excited about and it did 50,000 views, I'd be like, what did I do?
Yep.
Like what's wrong? You know.
Yeah.
And now it's much more predictable. So overall, I think that's a better way to approach it, even though it might mean you're not hitting 1 million views on a video as often. So
Yeah, I think it also gives you the freedom to do more of what you want. I know, like, people like Sarah Dietschy have said, you know, the way that she approaches YouTube is like, I'll do one for me, one for the fans. Almost like, you know, I'll choose a topic that I know is going to do well because I have to do that for my business to be sustainable. And then in return, I get a video that's like about what I want to talk about.
I started to put some things out on the internet that I literally only made because they made me laugh. I made them for me. I made them without any intention of anybody ever seeing them. And I was just like, you know, I mean, I shouldn't say that because I put them online. So of course I
Right.
expected somebody to see them, but I didn't think they'd go anywhere. I think it's easy to forget that when we're gauging our level of success on the metrics, like you mentioned, where the only thing you're paying attention to is view count, right? It's easy to forget that, hey, I need to make content that I'm excited about. Otherwise, people are going to know that I'm not excited about it,
Yeah.
and that's going to come through, and thus the results are they're gonna show, because people are not going to be excited about your content if you're not excited about it.
Yep. Well, I deal with a lot of anxiety around turning the camera on in the first place. It's funny. I used to film and I would just film and just whatever. If I flub a line, I flub a line, blah, 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 whatever. And now it's like I have to feel like I'm 100% ready to do it perfectly, which it never ends up being perfect.
Sure.
There's always flubbed lines, but I will push off filming for anything.
You know, you mentioned having anxiety about turning the camera on. I guess I don't fully know like how to define anxiety in that sense, because I don't know if what I experience is that, or maybe it's something different. But regardless, what I will sometimes go through is I will feel like if I can't fully see the end product before I start, I go, who cares about this? Like, why should I even make this video? Like, nobody cares about this. And by the time I get halfway through the edit or 3/4 of the way through the edit, I'm kind of going, oh, this is kind of a cool piece.
Yep.
But turning that camera on, I have to break through that wall of like, no one cares. Like, why? Nobody wants to hear what I have to say. But now it's like, I really want to think of some way that I can utilize something in the world that people maybe are familiar with to help bring a value point to my audience that is interested in this particular thing. And in my case, normally that's understanding more about how to apply music or how to understand music or learn music theory, et cetera. But that initial breakthrough of like, maybe somebody does want to learn this, or maybe somebody, and then the other thing, and I'm curious to see if you have this as well, but do you ever get to a point where it's like the things you talk about, like, you know all this stuff, and we can sometimes falsely impose our own perspective onto our audience?
Oh yeah.
In the sense of like, in the sense of like, why am I telling you this? Like, you guys know this.
Yep.
I don't need to tell you this. Like,
Dude, I had this exact anxiety about my first Skillshare class.
Really?
Yeah. Like,
Oh, we've come a long way since then,
knew,
folks.
I knew cerebrally, I'm like, okay, I know this content is valuable, but my first Skillshare class is like, it's basic productivity systems.
And you're like, who needs
it's
to know
task
this?
management, it's Google
Yeah.
Calendar, it's Evernote, it's like file managing. We filmed the whole class and it was getting ready to launch, and I'm like, I was so scared people they're gonna pay for Skillshare and
You're like,
they're gonna watch
"What
my
is
class and they're
this?"
gonna be like, excuse me, where's like the 500 line Excel formulas that are going to run my entire toaster? This is so basic. And then the reviews start coming in. People were like, this was exactly what I needed. And
Yes.
and I know
Yes.
this, but it's so hard to believe it, to believe that, yes, I have come down a road and I'm helping other people come down that road and they haven't really started yet, or they're not to where I am yet. And I think that's like, it's freeing to remind yourself that.
I mean, it's so easy to feel like everything's been done. You're just like, and in fact, going back to kind of talking about, what we were talking about thinking, who cares about this? Why do I need to make this? Like, who cares, right? And so when we constantly see these new boundaries being pushed in music, just as an example, but this is happening with everything, right?
Everything,
But in music, you're like, somebody will do something new, and you're like, oh yeah, no, I guess I really haven't heard something like this before.
Yeah.
And it's constantly just like, oh no, we haven't, like, there is so much that has not been done.
So yeah, I guess like the whole point I had here was for anybody listening to this who hasn't gotten into being a creator yet and wants to be, everything has absolutely not been done before. There's always something.
No, there are an infinite number of things that have yet to be done or yet to be discovered. And I think just being able to kind of like, okay, help people get closer and closer to that, and also trying to discover that for ourselves as creators too. It's just like, and it's difficult because amongst all of that, then we have the things we discussed earlier, where it's like, okay, trying to convince yourself, like, not having the anxiety to turn on the camera and trying to break through those walls, because like all the while we're constantly searching for that thing, that thing where it's like, how can we do this in a way that hasn't been done before, that might be able to offer a new point of value for the viewer, and yeah, that's the never ending the never ending project of content creation, I guess. But
Well, hey, not to make this a never-ending conversation, but
it would be if given the chance.
It would be. We talk for hours. Thanks for coming on my secret podcast.
Well, thanks for having me on the secret podcast. It's a secret, and I won't tell anybody.
Don't
about
tell
it.
anybody.
I won't tell a
except
soul.
for everyone you can possibly tell.
I'll tell those people, but no one else.